Ladies and gentlemen, this is TVP World. You're watching Ukraine This Week, taking you from the front lines to behind the scenes. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee. Russia continues its attack on Ukraine. Over the past week, deadly strikes hit Dnipro, Kherson, Nikopol, Kharkiv, and Sumy, where a missile attack on Palm Sunday killed at least 35 people, including 2 children, and injured more than 100. As international diplomacy moves forward, high-level talks in Paris this week brought renewed focus to Ukraine. Marco Rubio called the discussions productive, but warned that time is not on Ukraine's side. Kyiv and Washington have also signed a memorandum of intent confirming their shared commitment to finalize an agreement on developing Ukraine's mineral resources. To discuss all of this, we'll be joined by Dr. Alexander Krayev, Director of the North America Program at the Ukrainian Foreign Policy Prism Council. But first, let's take a look at the key events and highlights from Ukraine over the past week.
Two ballistic missiles slammed into the heart of the northern Ukrainian city of Sumy on Sunday, killing 35 people and wounding 117 in the deadliest strike on Ukraine this year. Residents of Sumy are mourning their dead. Viktor Boyko and Olha Boyko were on a bus when Ukrainian missiles hit.
They were very good people. They were always together. Wherever they went, they always went together. They were a good couple. They had a good life. They were kind, hard-working people, calm. It is horrible that they died a terrible death.
But the explosions and the cries of victims still echo among the ruins. This body cam footage released by the Sumy police shows the shock and horror of the first moments after the attack.
The number of killed and wounded on the street, in public transport, in cars that were passing by, proves that it was a terrorist attack solely against civilian population.
World leaders were quick to express solidarity with Ukraine and condemn Russia for adding yet another position to the long list of war crimes it has committed since the start of the war. One leader's reaction, however, was far from condemnation.
I think it was terrible, and I was told they made a mistake. But I think it's a horrible thing. I think the whole war is a horrible thing. I think the war is, for that war to have started, is an abuse of power.
As usual, Moscow says Russia only strikes military or military-related targets, but the growing number of attacks and casualties in Ukraine calls these claims into question.
This Friday marks exactly 1 month since Russia rejected the American proposal for a full and unconditional ceasefire. They are not afraid, and that's why the ballistic missiles were launched. That's why there are hundreds of drones attacks every night.
While there have been many attacks like the one on Sumy, there is no getting used to the aftermath. Throughout the week, Russia launched many more attacks on various Ukrainian towns, killing and wounding dozens of civilians. And as long as the ceasefire is not reached, many more innocent civilians will continue to die. Ukrainian strike drones hit the base of Russia's 112th Missile Brigade in Shuya, in the Ivanovo region, for the second time in just 4 days, causing powerful explosions and a fire on the base grounds. The attack, reported on April 17, follows a deadly missile strike on Sumy by the same brigade on April 13, which killed 35 people. Local reports on social media described multiple explosions around 3 a.m., followed by gunfire, with footage showing Russian soldiers attempting to shoot down the inbound drones. Authorities had previously warned of a potential drone strike, and local residents shared videos of a fire that erupted at the site. It is believed that the strike may have targeted a hangar containing Iskander ballistic missiles or other weapons systems. On April 16, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky marked the Day of Defense Industry Worker, revealing that over 40% of the weapons currently used at the front line are now produced domestically.
Russia must come to terms with the inevitability of Ukrainian strength. A true and lasting peace can be achieved only when reality forces Russia to accept our capabilities. Our drones, Ukrainian-made missiles, our artillery, Ukrainian shells, our equipment, everything produced in Ukraine will defend Ukraine, our people's lives and our state.
In response to Russia's full-scale invasion, Ukraine has significantly expanded its defense manufacturing capacity, with plans to further reduce dependence on foreign suppliers. The country has allocated $1.3 billion in its 2025 budget to support the growth of its defense industry, aiming to strengthen its military capabilities. Additionally, Ukraine is set to raise over $1 billion to support direct arms purchases from Ukrainian manufacturers. The time to end the war in Ukraine is now. That's according to US Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who added that Washington will stop trying to broker a peace deal within days unless there are clear signs that an agreement can be reached.
We're not going to continue with this endeavor for weeks and months on end. So we need to determine very quickly now, and I'm talking about in a matter of days, whether or not this is doable over the next few weeks. If it is, we're in. If it's not, then we have other priorities to focus on as well.
Comments from US officials come a day after French President Emmanuel Macron hosted Rubio and Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff for talks where European and Ukrainian officials pleaded Kyiv's case. The talks are expected to resume in London next week. Washington and Kyiv were able to sign a memorandum on the mineral deal. The memorandum means that the actual deal can be signed next week.
Our intentions are positive, we are constructive, and we are showing this. Honestly, I think this memorandum is an important first step.
The US brokered peace process is underway. Any tangible results, however, have yet to materialize, and the next days will be crucial for Kyiv.
Joining us now to unpack the latest developments is Dr. Alexander Krayev, Director of the North America Programs at the Ukrainian Foreign Policy Prism Council. With a deep background in transatlantic relations and security policy, he offers us insight into Ukraine's shifting battlefield and diplomatic front lines. Hello, sir, and welcome to TVP World.
Yeah, greetings. Thanks for having me.
So first, I would like to draw attention to Senator Marco Rubio's most recent remarks, suggesting waning U.S. patience. How serious is the risk of Western fatigue?
This risk is definitely a serious one because we've been hearing about this kind of stuff for the last 2 years at least. And definitely this symptom is called Ukraine fatigue, and it's definitely something that Ukrainian diplomacy has been countering on many fronts, not the American one only. And definitely we do see that Donald Trump and his team, they cannot get the result as fast as possible, as encompassive as possible. So definitely there is something they can wage upon, so they can use this as a method of pressure diplomatically speaking and politically speaking on Ukraine and also to some extent on Russia, because we should understand that not only Ukraine is in a state of fatigue militarily and economically, Russia is also not in the best shape yet. Russia is also having trouble with mobilization, industrial complex, and of course great deal of troubles with the economy. So basically the Americans, who are viewed favorably both by Ukrainian and Russian administration, they're trying to push both sides to get at the negotiation table as fast as possible before the Americans themselves will become disinterested.
All right, so very interesting enough, this perhaps is another Trump team's negotiation tactic. But that's a worst case scenario, a deal doesn't come into fruition and U.S. actually does decide to pull out and stop the negotiation process. What does that exactly look like? Are we seeing like a complete pullout support of Ukraine or the status quo? Where do you think things would go?
That's a hard one. Generally speaking, I do believe we'll definitely see a status quo mostly, rather than a full pull-up of American forces. Of course, we do understand that one of the major Trump's campaign items was that America will pay less for European security, and basically America will withdraw its forces from Europe. It will withdraw a lot of support from Ukraine, but at the same time we should also understand that withdrawing from Ukraine and leaving Ukraine up to Russia and up to Europe will be seen as a weak point in trade negotiations and political negotiations with China. So it's not only about Ukraine or about Russia, it's about America being viewed as a serious counterpart, as a serious and strong nation that should be counted on. And in that regard, I do believe that Americans leaving Ukraine is a not very plausible scenario. Mostly we will see something akin to a Minsk negotiation. And I should remind that Minsk negotiation basically put out a hold on any hostilities. It made the conflict a frozen one. Nobody was doing nothing. Everything went to a hold, but at the same time the territories were in a gray zone. Russia did not accept the territories to be Ukrainians. Ukraine does not accept the territories to be Russian, and so everything come to a full stop.
Right, you also mentioned something very important just now, that it's not just Ukraine or the rest of the world experiencing any sort of fatigue. Russians are also running a little bit low on supply. When it comes to their artillery, for example, a lot of reports are saying that they're mostly relying on North Korean shells. Actually, how sustainable is Russia's momentum in keeping the war going? Do you think that they also have a vested interest to actually see this end?
They definitely see a lot of interest in at least securing the successes they have as of now. We do see that the main cornerstone in all the negotiation process is that Russia wants Ukraine and the West to recognize Russian claims on all the territories they have already occupied, and additionally some more territories that they have included into their constitution, even without occupying it. And for that result, for that sake, they are now throwing their soldiers on every part of the front, on the north, on the east, and on the south as well. They do understand that negotiations are close, and they are close enough. They will start in no time, and they are just trying to grab as much as possible before the negotiations start. But you are absolutely right. We do see the decrease even in number of shells being fired upon Ukrainians' position. For example, in 2023, it was a ratio 10-1. So 10 Russian shells of artillery against 1 Ukrainian shell. Now we see 5-5. So basically it's a equal parity between Ukrainian and Russian artillery. Although Russian artillery surpasses Ukrainian twofold. The same goes for drones, the same goes for tanks, the same goes for a lot of equipment. We do understand that Ukraine's resources are still smaller than the Russian one, but Russia's resources are also not infinite.
Now, you mentioned that, Russians are intensifying their attacks on Ukraine as well, and this might be also because they are facing down in the eventual negotiation. We've seen, like you mentioned earlier, that they're pushing them essentially into the meat grinder, as well as an intensifying missile strike on civilian infrastructure as well. We see the type of Iskander missiles, the cluster munition they're using. These are causing heavy casualty to civilian. Do you think that's also more like a strategic escalation, or maybe more of a sign of desperation?
Just to put a little bit more context for that, because unfortunately, I think we'll create some exclusive content for our viewers because it's not being discussed in Western or any other apart from Ukrainian media. But together with these rocket strikes, Russia launched one of the biggest informational campaigns within Ukrainian-speaking social media and within Ukrainian informational sources. We do see a lot of Russian-speaking ads and Russian-speaking narratives that the war should end now. You should not mobilize into the armed forces. You should protest against Zelensky. You should protest against your local government. And so basically, together with these terror strikes goes a big informational campaign in order to push some of the Ukrainians who have some doubts in the government or in the armed forces, to push them to protest governmental policy and just play into Russian hands. So it's not only about desperation, although you're absolutely right, they have some kind of a battle desperation, because throughout the last week they lost more than 1,000 soldiers each day. So more than 7,000 soldiers per week, but at the same time they only conquered 10 square meters of Ukrainian territories for that losses. So it's both a desperation and also an informational hack, a part of their informational campaign to influence the civilian population of Ukraine.
Actually, I'm not super surprised to hear that, because in the rest of the world, we're actually also experiencing a very similar situation with every Russian bomb dropping. We're also seeing the intensification of Russian disinformation campaign. We here at TVP World actually experienced our own kind of fake video published by Russia just a few days ago. But I'm also curious about what that effect has, not just the misinformation, but the actual strike on civilian infrastructure, killing so many in various regions of Ukraine. How is the mood, and how are the Ukrainians kind of coping with the attacks as well as all these kind of information warfare?
Well, we have solemn days now. We are getting ready for Easter, both the Catholic and the Orthodox part of Ukrainian community. And so it is a somber moment for everybody. It is a very important holiday for all of the Ukrainians. And sustaining such casualties, especially children being killed with these rocket strikes, is a devastating strategy for Ukrainian population. And of course, a lot of talk there are about our anti-air security, about our partners helping us enough, about the policies. But at the same time, I do also see the same thing I saw in 2022, in 2023 and 24. Although the situation is dire, although the circumstances are devastating, it is this crisis that can unite Ukrainians under one banner. So basically, yeah, we see a lot of disinformation campaigns. We see a lot of pressure, peer pressure on Ukrainian military and civilian population as well. But it's some kind of a somber perseverance, because for the last several days, because of the strikes on Sumy and because of strikes on Dnipro, the media went quite silent in many regards. Of course, we do commemorate all the victims and casualties of the strategies, but there are no politics. There are basically no, discussion about who's to blame and what to do. It is understandable that Russia is to blame, and we should just carry on. There is no other option. So that is something that brings me some positivity, seeing Ukrainians being as united.
Right. I think the key word when it comes to describing Ukrainian in this kind of situation is perseverance. And I would also like to turn our attention more to the diplomatic front again, because we do also see that the U.S.-Ukraine mineral deal is being described with substantial progress. Now, how significant is this agreement going to be for, be it economically or strategical resilience, or even to function as some sort of de facto security guarantee?
Well, the negotiation, first of all, they are being quite tough because Americans want a lot of control for less of their security guarantees. They're basically telling us that no political agenda should be put into that negotiation. No political points should be included into the treaty itself. But at the same time, Ukrainians should take all the responsibility for the rare earth mineral deal. They should take all the additional costs for the extraction, and the Americans should keep the control of the investment fund. Of course, for Ukraine, it's a no-go scenario. So we're still negotiating on a 50-50 scenario with this investment fund and with all the necessary additional costs. It is a good sign that we have signed a memorandum of understanding like 2 days ago with the Americans that said that basically, yeah, we have some disagreements on the particular parts of the treaty, but generally speaking, both parties are interested in conducting this treaty. And if to speak about what that will bring for Ukraine, apart from the political side, because it's just about keeping Americans interested in Ukraine, basically. From economic point of view, we need those investments. We need those interests of foreign investors and foreign companies, and especially foreign state-level companies in Ukrainian industry, in Ukrainian infrastructure, because we lack sufficient resources and we lack sufficient fund for our post-war reconstruction. And even if we speak about rare earth minerals, the minerals that the deal is all about, we do have them a lot, but we lack necessary technology and necessary investment. So it's not about giving up Ukrainian sovereignty, as a lot of experts say. It is about getting additional business partners in order to get profits from something that we have, but cannot ourselves profit from.
Right. Well, I've asked some American security experts when it comes to this particular deal, and the feedback I've gotten is that Americans do want to make sure that it is a profitable endeavor, but that's also of interest for Ukraine, seeing that it de facto make America more interested in protecting its sovereignty. But also I've heard from other side of the aisle saying that perhaps the fact that a lot of these minerals are close to bordering Russia, being on the east side of Ukraine, and some even in the Russian-occupied territory, they don't feel so safe, seeing that there is a potential world where Russia could just perhaps offer America the minerals there and just kind of carve up the land. And which camp do you stand on, and where do you see things are going from here?
I'm in a more pragmatic camp, is that the work is still ongoing. And basically, that's the thing what I said about the tough negotiation. We do definitely see a lot of nuances there. We definitely know that Russia have already proposed Americans with an alternative deal. Alternative deal not only for the occupied territories that you absolutely rightfully recalled about, but also about the rare earth minerals in Russia itself. So basically, we have a competitor here. It's not only about Ukraine and the US. It's also about Russians trying to beat our stake in this negotiation, and it's absolutely understandable. It's a very hard process. International economy is hard, especially when it is done in the wartime. But at the same time, more than 80% of Ukrainian rare earth minerals are situated in the central Ukraine along the Dnipro River, and so basically we can adapt our infrastructure there. We can protect our infrastructure there because most of the big industrial complexes in Ukraine are situated in the same region, near the city of Dnipro, Zaporizhia, and Kryvyi Rih. And so basically, we already have some experience in protecting those sites and in protecting those cities. So yeah, the deal is hard. The process of negotiation is even harder. It is not only about politics and economy. It is also basically about marketing, about getting sure that our investors and our possible partners will get the right message and will be convinced enough in order to invest into Ukraine. But as I say, the work is still going on. We still have some prospects. And the fact that Americans are still ready to negotiate with us, despite all the issues and despite the proposals from Russia, is, I think, the most positive sign here that, yes, this work can be done.
So do you think a deal will actually be signed around April, by the end of April?
In this part, I'm not that optimistic. I'm convinced it will be signed near the 100 days anniversary of Trump's presidency, so closer to the start of May or even first half of the May, because there are still not only the political issues there, but mostly even technical ones. Yeah. Because let's not forget that Ukrainian constitution states that all the mineral resources of Ukraine underneath Ukrainian soil are the common property of the whole Ukrainian people. So there are still some mishaps with this investment venture, especially done at the state level. So we need some time to deal with that as well.
Right, and I'd like to go to the diplomatic level once again because, well, we were discussing about how America potentially losing interest in helping facilitate these negotiations. And most of the narrative is that Trump is, well, trying to put less focus on the Russian-Ukraine war and start focusing more on the Indo-Pacific. Recently, Zelensky has claimed about Chinese involvement in Russian arms production. On one hand, I'm also curious about how credible is the intelligence and what are the implications? Do you think that the fact that we're linking Russia and China together makes it so that the U.S. administration can just look at these two parties in a vacuum, saying that we're backing out from talking about Russia, we're focusing on China now, where Zelensky is essentially hinting at, well, the fact that China and Russia are working together means that these two are not really separable.
Yes, that's definitely the main point here, just to show the Americans that anything you do with Russia will influence your relations with China, and anything you do to China will influence your relations with Russia. So basically, backing down on Russia will make you appear weak in the eyes of the Chinese, vice versa, the same way. So basically, getting China and Russia tied together, even concerning their weapons manufacturing or some other kind of support, or even these Chinese citizens being captured in Ukraine. By the way, it's not the first time we have such information. And in the end, if I'm not mistaken, in November 2022, there were first few casualties. The soldiers had Chinese passports on them. It was around 5 or 7 of them. So it's not the first instance, but this is the first instance when we get Chinese mercenaries alive. And so we can present these evidences. But once again, as I said, the main point is to show American administration and Trump himself that you cannot separate Russian issue and Chinese issue. Everything you do on one front will inevitably influence the other front. And the main argument here is that we do know that China is looking vigorously and diligently at what West will do to Russia and how West will help Ukraine, because it's a model. It's basically a blueprint for Western support to Taiwan. Taiwan, in many instances, in a very similar, not 100% similar, but very similar position position with Ukraine, not being a part of NATO or any other former alliance with the West, only receiving military support, political support, economic support. And so basically any aggression against Taiwan will definitely meet the same response from the West as it was with Ukraine. So China is also very interested in what US will do next with Ukraine.
Right, so how Trump resolved the Ukraine issue actually does have direct interest in his, basically being on a warpath with China. Now, last but not least, I'm also interested in Russians maneuvering on this. Recently, Vladimir Putin or Russians are offering to be the negotiator between the Russian-Iranian deal. And, well, of course, most of the world's focus on how that nuclear deal will go down. I'm also curious whether or not Russia is also using that as a leveraging tool and presenting itself as a reliable negotiation partner, or maybe behind the table there was some deal being made where it can give him a better foothold in the Ukraine situation by perhaps giving up parts of Iranian interest?
That's also quite hard to analyze because we basically lack information. We're dealing with at most 10% of the information available publicly. But if we put together some of the additional extra context that is going on as of now, we will see the bigger picture. And then the theory that Trump is trying to enhance the negotiation field with Russia, including Middle East into these talks, it will become much and much more probable. For example, we saw that Trump was the one blocking Israel from attacking Iranian nuclear facilities in the desert several days ago. At the same time, we do see that Trump is thinking about easing sanctions on Chinese banks who deal with Iranian oil. And at the same time, we do see Witkoff, who said that some easing of sanctions against Russia will also play into hand of the negotiation. So definitely we see some backing up, not a general one, but some steps away from the original American position on Trump's side. We do see that he is backing down on Israel to some extent. He's backing down on sanctions. He's backing down on Russia. So definitely this idea of making Russia a moderator, a mediator, basically, in the negotiations with Iran is also some kind of a proposal to Russians to be once again included into international diplomacy. So it's a so-called Trumpian courtesy. He is trying to be a friend with Putin and with all the other dictators in order to get a deal from them.
Right, so it does seem like still a lot more is in the air, and Ukraine has a turbulent time ahead, indeed, being in the front line or behind the scenes. But in the meantime, thank you so much for breaking down all of that for us. Really appreciate it. And thanks for being with us on Ukraine This Week.
Thank you for having me.
Yes. And that's all on this episode of Ukraine This Week. Tune in next time, next week on TVP World.